Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, well, we did it. We did it. We've come to our final presentation of the day. It has been for me, it has been a fantastic experience to get to have these conversations about the digital curriculum with all of you. My thanks to Dr. Rogers for making this opportunity for all of us possible. My thanks to all of you for participating, for coming, to listening to for listening to the sessions, but also for everyone who presented. Raise your hand if you presented today. Look at that. Yes, yes. Thank you. We also have amazing staff who've been working at the front table and people who've been feeding us, and these things are great. So it's my honor to introduce our final closing keynote speaker. Todd Taylor is the Eliason Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he also directs the first-year writing program. Since the early 1990s, Todd's research and teaching have examined how literacy is evolving in response to rapidly changing digital information and networked technologies. Todd is the author of Adobe Creative Cloud Across the Curriculum, a guide for students and teachers, and Becoming a College Writer, a multimedia text, and co-editor of Literacy Theory in the Age of the Internet. He earned his bachelor's degree at Emory University and his master's and Ph.D. at the University of South Florida. Todd's presentation is titled The Deepest Dive, Critical Digital Literacy Across the Curriculum. So welcome to Todd.
Thank you so much for giving me an excuse to be back in Florida and to speak again about what I love to do. I have that long title, but if I were asked to abbreviate it into the simplest concept, I am a pedagogical evangelist. So that's what I'm about. You can follow this presentation at this URL here. You can also see every other presentation I've been giving over the last 18 months on digital literacy. To sort of focus on what my experiences have been and how we can all get through this together. I think of these conversations as an invitation to innovation. I think of the conversations about technology in the classroom as an opportunity to think about what difference we want to make, what is it we want to transform, what do we want to change, and most specifically, what are the learning outcomes that we want to promote and deliver? And then how can we use these very powerful technologies to do that? We've been asking lots of really important questions during this symposium. And I find in my experience that the answers to these important questions about technology and education can be found when a diverse array of committed people get around a table and start talking creatively and honestly about where they aim to go. And so thank you so much to the provost here and to the Gates Foundation and to Adobe and to everyone who supported this, because this is how change, I think, happens, when you get like-minded people sitting around talking about where it is they want to go. I also have the great honor of sort of coming in final, the dessert of the event. And so I'm going to sort of touch on what other people have been saying in this room since last night. And I'm going to begin with what Casey was talking about as sort of the keys to doing this successfully, which is high-touch pedagogy, and therefore the corollary to that is faculty development. And that seems, in my case, over the last 25 years of working with instructional technology, to be the limiting reagent, and the place to strategize your investments and attention is on faculty development. In reference to Karen's keynote, she showed a famous taxonomy from Bloom. There are many different versions of this from different people, but they all kind of add up to the same thing, this sort of building up of abilities towards, for lack of a better term, higher order thinking and analysis and study and intellectual involvement. And in Karen's slide, she had this line drawn across the middle of her pyramid where adaptive learning was able to deliver on the sort of the base of the pyramid, and that active learning in class is where these sort of higher order things happen. And I'm going to really focus on that more active, higher order kind of teaching and learning in the pedagogies that I'm eager to promote. Laura began her keynote by talking about the qualities that the students who are in our educational institutions need to have and need to leave with. And so this comes from the most recent sort of survey of the World Economic Forum as published in Forbes magazine. What are the top 10 abilities that people need to thrive in the profession today? The first is complex problem solving. The second is critical thinking. The third is creativity, people management. And so it's these soft intellectual skills. It's not the hard intellectual skills that are the things that are going to really transfer from our classes to professions, to careers, to communities that our students are entering into. And it's also going to prepare them to move through an increasingly complex world where it's been said many times in many different ways, we don't even know the jobs that we are actually preparing them to do because they don't exist yet. We need to prepare them to be lifelong learners, to be versatile and adaptable. And so these soft skills define that kind of ability for where they might be 10 years or even 20 years from the moment they leave our institutions, or at least leave them for the first time. And so when it came to looking at putting together a digital literacy initiative at UNC Chapel Hill, we thought about where we want to make our investments strategically. We thought we did not want to do things the same way we used to. We were not interested in sort of traditional ways of content delivery and consumption. We also weren't interested so much in student surveillance or administration. What we really wanted to do was invest in putting software and applications in the hands of students to see what they could do with it to promote experiential and active learning. And so the result of that sort of strategy session was a partnership with Adobe, and that's been very, very successful for us. And I want to stress this. There are many paths to God, so to speak, and Adobe may not be the right choice for you or your campus or your program. And so as I'm going through this, think about the thought processes and the strategies we use for you to pick out the right sort of partners or solutions or companies that fit what you're doing. And so what it has meant for us was just exactly what I opened with. It became this opportunity or invitation for innovation. It got like-minded people from around our campus together, sitting around tables, literally in the administration building, where I met deans from the School of Journalism and from the School of Nursing and from the School of Public Health for the first time. And it was amazing how we all went around the table and we said the same exact things about what we had in mind in terms of how we wanted to move the needle, how we wanted to make a difference, and how we wanted to rethink and transform our curriculum. And so the result of that was a strategic partnership with Adobe, and I'll talk in detail about that. But for those of you who might not know what Adobe is, who knows what this icon stands for? Photoshop. And who knows what this icon stands for? Illustrator. And who knows what this icon stands for? See, it's a trick question. It's brand new. It came out in October. It's Adobe Premiere Rush, and it is the just right, just perfect application for teachers and students. It's a video editor that's designed to work the same on mobile device, on tablet, on laptop. It's device and platform agnostic, and it has basically no learning curve for our students, and yet it's very powerful. And so this is a very important application that's just come out that shows the direction these things are going in. Who recognizes this application icon? None of you, because I made it up myself. And this is the most important application in the Adobe Creative Cloud collection of applications. And it doesn't stand for what you think it does. It stands for student experience. And as a pedagogical evangelist, to me, this is almost like the icon that I want above my desk. That as I'm going through all of this, as I'm making decisions, as I'm thinking about this sometimes heavy lifting of changing cultures and making oftentimes very expensive investments, we always want to focus on the student experience. We always want to focus like a laser on how this is going to transform teaching and learning, how this is going to make a difference, what are our program principles, what defines our curricula, what are our learning outcomes, what do we want to do differently, what's not working about the way we used to teach students, And how can we use this opportunity, this moment of some real power and potential to make that difference and to be strategic about that? And so I am a state employee, and I've gone through periods of relatively of high times and low times, and we were in a very low time in 2008 in the state of North Carolina, where the budgets have continued to be cut every year, even though revenue has gone back up in our state. And so I had a lot of really good software at my disposal in 2005 and 2006 and 2007, but it was incrementally taken away from me because of budget cuts. And I said, we really need this, we really want this. And I've known since about 2005 that I wanted to have a multimodal digital literacy required project in the first year writing program that I direct, but I didn't have the software to deliver it to my students. I couldn't make it a requirement and a fundamental part of our curriculum because we didn't have the budget. Every time I ask ITS for anything, the answer is, we're laying people off. We can't add anything more to the plate. And so I was sitting in my office in February of 2016, telling the students in my digital storytelling class, don't download the free trial software until April 1st, so you can finish your project by May 1st in the 30 days you have to access the software. When all of a sudden I get a call from our CIO, and actually it was an email, and he's like, I'd like to talk to you. And that was really cryptic and me. I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I download? What server did I crash? And he said, we're going to Clemson University to see what they've been doing in their partnership with Adobe. Would you like to come along? And so I go to Clemson University, and they're talking about the things I've been wanting to do for years. And I'm at dinner, and it was just happenstance that I sat next to the CIO, whom I never met and never had a conversation with before. And he says, so do you have any ideas of what you would do with this? I'm like, are you kidding me? I've got 20 years of ideas. I just need someone who can make the difference, right? And so many people are shocked that English teachers, composition teachers, and writing program administrators have 15, 20 years of ideas about how multimodal composition can really change teaching and learning at the hub of the curriculum. And we've heard so much in this room in the keynote addresses about gateway courses, about the center of the curriculum, about those first-year threshold experiences that are so pivotal to student success and retention. And then you have a demographic, a group of faculty members who really have ideas of what to do. And so I'll talk a little bit later about how our CIO actually made it happen, but here's a quick video that kind of summarizes our relationship and the initiative.
The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is the first public university in the United States, and so of course we take that with a great sense of pride.
There's a sense in which students who arrive here appreciate that they have a special opportunity.
The partnership between UNC and Adobe Creative Cloud has provided licenses for every single student. It's only natural that you would want to take the most powerful collection of digital literacy tools and make them accessible to your students, because this is how knowledge is made. The students find it extremely engaging to use Adobe Creative Cloud to get their work done in any class, anywhere across the curriculum. So nursing, business, public health, even physics, chemistry, religious studies, and anthropology are using these tools not to learn how they work, but to help support teaching and learning.
Everyone having access to this also means that you can learn from one another, which I think is going to be the best training tool and adoption tool as this continues to grow in the next couple of years.
The engagement when students are working on digital projects goes way up, and I think that's linked to internal motivation as opposed to being motivated for a grade. What was really great about watching my students do this video poetry assignment was the students started to better understand their poems. It can happen in traditional ways, but the technology kind of makes really unexpected things jump out.
I define digital literacy as critical digital literacy, which means it's not just the ability to use digital and information tools, it's the ability to think critically and to get critical work done with them.
If I can use digital tools to move students to be active producers of knowledge rather than passive consumers, then I think it's really valuable.
Students are really excited by the opportunity to really engage their work and not just produce work that's going to end up on a shelf and no one else is going to see. These are communication tools, and they inherently want students to take their deeply intellectual work and circulate it. At the end of every application right now, there's a share button, and that's not accidental, that's powerful.
This has truly been a partnership. We have seen investments on both sides of the equation. I'm pleased because Adobe certainly has invested in the University of North Carolina. Here in Chapel Hill, we're happy that Adobe can help us better provide these capabilities to our faculty and students, which they've done.
All of these sorts of problem-solving approaches are really what's going to make you a valuable employee as you move forward.
It's going to tell a story about who they are as a person, what they're doing, and what they want to do that will set them apart from other students in the same industry that are at universities that don't have access to this.
There's clearly no limit to this. My students see that and their eyes light up.
And so I went from a resource desert to a resource orchard. And I'd like to connect with Laura's keynote that talks specifically about what a difference that people in the upper administration can really make here. And so it wasn't our provost, but it was someone at the very highest level, the CIO, who's an executive vice chancellor, who really made this difference. And so the idea, though, was we didn't want to commit to the concept until we had a real strategic plan. And the real strategic plan was built around the kinds of pedagogies that so much of the current research is pointing to is high-touch, experiential, project-based, collaborative-based, where students are making things, they're problem-solving. And so imagine compared to writing a conventional proposal for some kind of business or project, that students use Adobe XD to prototype a mobile app instead of writing that proposal. And instead of doing conventional peer-reviewed literature reviews of a scientific issue, students published a scientific journal using InDesign desktop publishing software instead of just writing it in a word processor. And imagine, instead of being PowerPointed again, students designed a presentation using microsite using Spark Page instead of formatting a slide deck. And then instead of just writing a research paper on a subject, what if students raised awareness by creating a documentary film using Premiere Rush? And so that was the pedagogical principle upon which this was all leveraged. And just, I'm an English professor, so I'm always paying attention to language. Look at the verbs in all of those sentences: prototype, collaborate, publish, design, raise awareness, compose, create. Notice how consuming is nowhere in that list, how content processing is not a part of this concept. And so the idea was to activate the kind of experiential, active learning pedagogies that so much of the research shows is the difference maker. It also leverages, this particular moment in time. It seems to be pretty clear that there is a digital renaissance going on, like there was back in Da Vinci's age. I love this particular illustration by Da Vinci because to me it sort of encapsulates the essence of that renaissance, this sort of alchemy or this new marriage between science and art that's represented in the human form, that it's both organic in its shape and geometric in its analysis in this particular illustration. And so I think that's what's happening right now with digital information technologies. There is this really powerful potential marriage and synergy between science and art, technology and humanity that I want my students to participate in. This is Shantanu, who's the CEO of Adobe, and he's talking about how their mission as a company is to change the world through digital experiences. And our mission in higher education is to change the world through educational experiences. And it's fascinating how these two things are coming together. So that what Adobe does is partially now changing the world through educational experiences, and part of what we're doing is changing the world through digital experiences. Part of this context also is about the clear re-examination and re-articulation of the value and the role of higher education. You can't go anywhere where people aren't re-examining their strategic plans. They aren't thinking about QEPs and restating their missions, right? because the world is changing. And I don't know any institution that isn't thinking about how they're redefining themselves in terms of at least two channels or axes, and that would be obviously information, digital network technologies, and globalization. And so how are we redefining and responding to these changing contexts? I think the result is that a lot of people want to provide and encourage transformative student experiences that prepare students to change their digital global professions and communities. So how do we do that? We see makerspaces popping up all across the country. What's Nova University's situation in terms of makerspaces? Do you have some that you created? And how long have you had them? Okay, and so why are we seeing these everywhere? It's because they provide this kind of high impact, high touch, as Casey named it, experiential active teaching and learning in a very tactile program, something you can put your finger on and you can look at. However, they're very expensive. They take up real estate. Just thinking about life cycling those 3D printers is something else to even consider. But the idea behind all this and the reason the investment is worth it is because it creates this opportunity, if I were to summarize it the way we did in that particular film clip, to take a generation of media and information consumers and start helping them become media, information, and idea producers. To help them participate in the generation and the circulation of ideas instead of just being recipients of some other people's thoughts. And so the idea is there that learning is much more effective through making, through problem solving, through creative critical thinking and learning, and that and then it also produces learning outcomes that transfer. And so our concept with the partnership with Adobe Creative Cloud at UNC was to think of Creative Cloud as a mobile makerspace that travels with our students wherever they go. They're not tethered to a lab. The students who are distance education or online learning almost ubiquitously have access to a smartphone where they can create, they can do this kind of experiential problem solving wherever they might be. And so our particular recipe in our now well-irrigated orchard that used to be a desert was to take the first year writing class and make it the threshold experience for the Digital Literacy Initiative and to do a different kind of flipping. We're all pretty familiar with the concept of the flipped classroom, where instead of coming to the class to receive content, you're coming to the class to apply content in collaboration with instructors and classmates, right? And so this was a slightly different kind of flipping, because if you look at the way these very powerful creative tools have been sort of applied, faculty and staff and labs get access to this, but the students don't. And so what we said was, we want to figure out a way to put this directly in the hands of students. And the way it all worked out was faculty and staff had to apply to get access to Creative Cloud license. And they had to apply based upon a statement on how they were going to propose to use it to transform teaching and learning. And that was also because when we sat around the room in the administration building with all the deans and the provost, everyone went around the room and said, we love this idea. This is exactly the direction we want to go in. I don't have a dime. 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 And the last statement was, and you can't raise student fees a penny because they've already been maxed out. And our CIO went to work and he said, I'll figure it out. And what he did was something that I think we really, really needed to think more about and talk more about, is he went to the students and the student government and he talked to them about their student fee. Their technology fee is by far, by double, the most expensive fee that they have on campus. And he said, what if we spent this amount of money on Adobe Creative Cloud instead of, I don't even know what it was, but he put the choice to them, and they decided among themselves that they would much rather have access to this instead of something else. And that's how we made it happen, and didn't spend one extra dime. And so we were able to make that commitment to students, to promise them that there would be a return on their investment by making sure that the moment students came to UNC in the first year writing class, they would get a first experience with this. And so our first year writing class is categorically interdisciplinary. We actually don't, even though we're in the Department of English, we don't answer to the Department of English. we answer to the faculty. And that's why the class is, the first unit is on the sciences, the second unit is on the social sciences, and the last unit is on the humanities. We are responsible for preparing students to go into any class, into any major, and to make evidence-based arguments and reasoning, and prepare them as the one common experience. No one at UNC Chapel Hill gets out of first year writing. There's no AP, there's no dual credit. Everyone, all 4,385 students, 240 sections, 105 instructors, all of them take first year writing. And so what we did was we looked at the way most people are approaching these creative tools, and we thought, these are actually interdisciplinary, or even maybe even transdisciplinary capacities, skills, and technologies and tools. And we want students to experience them the moment they come to campus as a threshold sort of moment, so that we're maximizing their exposure to this throughout their undergraduate career. You're not waiting until they're a major in graphic arts. You're not waiting until they're a major in comm studies. We're not even waiting until they're a senior to go, well, now you're ready to touch these really powerful tools. We're having them think about doing their intellectual work this way from the moment they come to campus. And so that's been our recipe at UNC. And so here is the list of different departments with faculty who applied for a pedagogical access to Creative Cloud in the very first semester of the adoption. And so if you look at it, it's every corner of the campus. And it's shocking to me that nursing and public health were as enthusiastic about this as was journalism. So what it has demonstrated to me is exactly that sort of idea that this is an interdisciplinary thing. This doesn't know any limits or silos, which is exactly kind of aligned with the direction so many people want to go in. And so, whenever we talk about this subject, so often we get lots of yeses, lots of nodding of heads. The question is, how do you really make it real? How do you deliver on this? What does it really look like to reimagine the student experience? And so to give you an example of that, I'm going to show you a film that was made by a student who'd never touched a video camera before, never certainly operated sophisticated video editing software. It tells the story of an elderly couple where the father is suffering from advanced Alzheimer's. And it's told from the perspective of the loving mother and son. It's by Carrie Lewis, and it's called Our Lives Together. And as you're watching this, keep reminding yourself this student had never made a film before in her life.
I think she is an incredibly giving person, and I think she tries to do her best to be a great wife, be a great caregiver to my dad. I think she takes her marriage covenant with my dad very seriously and tries to honor that, and is just an incredibly giving person, and has always put everybody else ahead of herself her whole life. And so she continues to live that out right now. I think it's been difficult, not only having to make decisions that she's not used to making, but also just to go through the pain of him not recognizing people and just deteriorating physically, and the frustration of, say, asking the same questions over and over every 5 minutes because he doesn't remember that he asked them already. Those kinds of things, are hard and they're frustrating, but she's incredibly patient and incredibly kind, incredibly loving, and just continues to work through it.
As long as there's breath, there is a plan. And I think there's untold joy in fitting into that plan. When all is said and done, that's really the point. What pleases the Lord? I mean, what fulfills what He created us to be and to do? Even if it were that you never touched the real person, which I don't believe that, but if it were, I think I would still feel the same way, because this is the man that I have lived with and honored and cared for. This is the commitment. This is marriage. This is our lives together.
So we want to always focus on the student experience. We think about how does the student experience of making this film compare with other kinds of typical assignments. And so what's enabled by this? I mean, compare this experience with your traditional research paper on Alzheimer's. Now, traditional research papers are important, and we still need to assign them. In fact, there was a lot of traditional kind of writing that prepared the student to make this film. But I don't know about you, but as an undergraduate, I'm an academic, and I can't remember a single paper I wrote in college. This student is never going to forget this, and neither am I as her professor. And so there's something else here that's kind of interesting and revealing. We think about what kind of class does this assignment belong in? And the first sort of instincts are, well, it seems like communications or journalism. But then you think more broadly about it, well, wouldn't this be really appropriate in psychology, sociology, public health, gerontology? In fact, if you think more broadly about this genre of audio-visual storytelling, based upon evidence, based upon often interviews with experts, there isn't a discipline where this doesn't belong. And so this kind of work is no longer, and should no longer be, just a thin slice of the curriculum. In fact, our entire QEP right now at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, undergraduate, is about communicating scientific knowledge. I tell my students all the time in a first-year writing class, never say to your professor, I couldn't find any information on that subject. You're in the information age. The skill, the capacity, the ability isn't finding the information, it's finding the best information. It's sifting through the information and then pulling out what really can make a difference, and then articulating a perspective to other people. That is the essential move of the information age. And so we think about the inherent nature of this and what it sort of begs our students to do. And one way I like to think of this is I want my students, first of all, what I've tried to do since the first moment I was in graduate school and I was teaching a university class, was I want students to demonstrate to themselves that what they're doing in this class transfers, that it has purpose, that it connects with the world outside the class, that they're not just doing it for me and for a grade and for credit. I want them to prove to themselves that their intellectual investments have purpose, that can have an impact. And so I'd like to share this portfolio of a student in my digital storytelling class. The student's name is Sarah Oshel. And in this class, students tell one story. They tell one story the entire semester, but they tell it in 6 different modes. And so it all begins with, what's a story that you want to tell that matters to you? What's a problem you want to solve, or some kind of awareness you want to raise, or a professional or community issue that you want to help try to solve? In this particular case, this is certainly a lot more lighthearted than the other story from the class. But this student is from a small town in North Carolina called Hillsborough, North Carolina, which is home to one of the first NASCAR tracks in the country. Now, I don't know if you're from North Carolina, but NASCAR is sacred, almost as sacred as college basketball in the state of North Carolina. I don't know what would be sacred in Fort Lauderdale, maybe saltwater fishing, I don't know. But it's a big deal, and it's a big deal to this small town that they have this tourist attraction. And so she wanted to promote it, and the way it begins is students take video cameras and still cameras, and they interview people about the particular issue. And then the first piece that's due in the class is to turn in a photo gallery. And here are the images that she created and edited in Adobe Photoshop. And that's the first mode. The second mode is to sift through those interviews that she conducted and then turn that information into a magazine article. And this is laid out as if it were a print magazine. And they use Adobe InDesign, which is desktop publishing software for that. Afterwards, we get to my favorite, which is making documentary films. And so I've been experimenting with service learning documentary films since 1999, and the idea all along was, again, to try to get students to connect their work in class with making a difference in their lives and in their communities. And so I've always been, as soon as these technologies became available, I was trying to strategize ways to make those connections and make those possibilities available. So documentary film, right now I would use Adobe Premiere Rush. After that, use Adobe Audition, which is audio editing software to create a podcast. And then finally, she used Adobe XD to create a mobile app so that when you physically go to this place, you can interact with GPS, GIS created links. And so that as you're walking around the site, you go over to one place and it's like in 1972, Richard Petty crashed through this turn and ended up in the Eno River. And over here behind the grandstands, they used to sell moonshine for $2 a can or whatever it was. So as you're physically interacting with this historic site, you get these little podcasts that pop up and tell the story. And I love this example of her idea of combining, her, I would almost like to say, although I don't believe it anymore, the left side of her brain and the right side of the brain. So this student, Sarah, is a beautiful writer. So she's a double major in creative writing and geology. And so she spends her work study hours in a GPS GIS lab, and she's used that part of her brain, that analytic, mathematical, very scientific part of her brain, as a way to tell stories in a very interactive and dynamic way. And so to me, this is exactly the kind of learning that I want to promote, where students are activating all parts of their brain, and they're able to also, from the moment every student was in this class, they knew they were going to use Adobe Portfolio, this 7th app at least in this collection, to create a portfolio of their work that was meant to earn them an internship or a job. And this student was so successful that Adobe didn't move fast enough to hire her, and she used this portfolio to get an internship at the Geographic Foundation in New York City to show what she can do. And what employers are saying, and what this particular employer said, was, you know what? It's not the production value. This is good-looking work. I mean, but it isn't so much the production value of the media you produced. It's the versatility of thought that you demonstrated by being able to move between all of these different modalities, to think about how a story changes as you move from one media approach to the next. And so it's that kind of nimbleness, that kind of intellectual acrobatics, if you will, that is so marketable today. And I tell all the students in this class, this is a sophomore level class, this is a 100 level class, it's an English class. I tell them, it's unlikely that you're going to become professional media producers, but there isn't a one of you that is going to go into a profession where you can afford not to understand how these things work. And the best way to understand how they work is to open up the hood and make something, solve a problem, and interact with these technologies themselves. And so it's amazing how this eventually ends up. And so I'm going to fast forward a minute to the best email I ever got as a professor, or one of them. And so this is like the professor's dream. And so this was 2016 when I got this. I thought of you because I am now in charge of my division's blog. I just utilized some HTML code that you taught me during my freshman year, which was 2000. When I reflect back on how I've used the skills you taught in that class, I'm amazed by what a positive impact you've had on my life. By using multimedia, you helped me understand the importance of strong communication skills, as well as giving me unique skills that others in my profession do not have. Now, I'd ask you to almost close your eyes and think, honestly, when you imagine this person, what do you think this person does? What comes to mind? What do you think? He could do anything. Other ideas? What came to mind? What's that? Graphic designer? Writer? Anyone? She is the assistant professor of emergency medicine at Emory Medical School. All right. And she's like, you can't believe how much of my life in teaching medical students is now hinging on the ability to make ideas understandable through multimodal approaches. And so what I think is happening here, not to get too philosophical or theoretical, is that it used to be the perspective that when you make something in one of these modalities, it's what you do after all the thinking has stopped. Like, I've done all the research, I've got all the ideas, now I need to give it to a grad student to put it in a sexy package to make my poster so I can go and present it. But what we find, if you start investing yourself and you have developing lots of experiences in making meaning this way, is it starts to become epistemological. It starts to influence the way you formulate ideas in themselves. And so I like to make this differentiation. These aren't just tools. These are something much more like an instrument. And the differentiation is a tool is something like a hammer. And then it's just sort of a crude extension of your fist or your elbow. It just makes you kind of mechanically stronger. But an instrument is something that makes you intellectually stronger. And an instrument is something like an electron microscope or a telescope through which you see the world differently. And then it has more of a power and potential to change the world. And to me, that's the pedagogical or conceptual orientation I think is so potentially powerful in thinking about a pedagogy like this, is seeing these things as instruments. And so you're not just ever, you never want to become obsessed with the technology itself. You never want to focus on the tool. You never want to teach to the tool. What you want to do is to approach it with this sort of instrumental idea where you're thinking about what problem do you want to solve? What needs to change? What needs to transform? What can we do differently? And how can we use this powerful technology to do that? And so in my classes, we spend as little time as possible on the tool, on the software, on which buttons to push, because we want to spend most of our focus and time on the subject of the course, on the ideas of what's going on. But what I find is when students become so deeply engaged and captured by these problems they're trying to solve, they become very, very technically good. I mean, that woman who made that Alzheimer's film had to become very sophisticated at video editing in a very short time, mostly self-taught. And why do you think she did it? Why do you think she invested the time? It's because she clearly cared so much about the story, and it was so important that it was told. And so to me, that's what I meant earlier when I talked about critical digital literacy. It's not just consuming information, it's not just learning how a tool works, it's trying to figure out how you can change the world with something so powerful. And so the story here is that we had a 3-year proposal. We had a 3-year action plan where in the first year of the adoption, we were going to test drive this on maybe a dozen, maybe 24 sections of first-year writing. We have 120 sections of first-year writing every semester, 240 sections a year, 105 instructors, as I said earlier, 4,385 students. And so the idea was to take it carefully, go start simple, be small, pilot it in a couple dozen sections the first year, double that in the second year, and then the third year we were going to do full implementation. And so the chancellor, the provost, and the dean of the college came to the Department of English for the first time in 22 years and asked us to report in 90 seconds or less the innovative things we were doing. Now, this was connected predictably with a capital campaign where they were going around the university looking for the sexiest ideas to sell to donors. But I'll take it. I'll take my 90 seconds of fame whenever I can get it, once every 22 years. And so I was halfway through this presentation, and I got to the point where I was talking about the 3-year implementation plan, and the chancellor interrupted me, dead stop, and said, "Did you say 3 years?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I don't want that. I want you to do full implementation immediately." And so I did not sleep that night because this is November of 2016, and by fall of 2017, I've got to get 105 instructors prepared to do this in ways that are pedagogically sound. And so since that very moment, my entire life has become dedicated to flattening the learning curve. That's the elephant in the room. That's been the elephant in the room when it comes to instructional technology for the 25 years I've been involved in it. How can we flatten the learning curve? How can we make it easy for faculty to say yes? How can we make it easy for faculty to walk out of a workshop and go, I can do this? How can we make it easy for program directors like myself to go, finally I have the tools that my students and my faculty need to make this successful? And so we have now arrived at a moment where the learning curve is flatter than ever. The applications, the menus, the interfaces are increasingly simple. Adobe Premiere Rush is an absolute game changer. I probably should have, but I'm not feeling dangerous. I could have made a video the whole time, and I could be editing on this phone and publish it before I'm done talking. It's that simple and that well designed. Obviously, our students are increasingly digital native, although we always have to be aware of technological access because it cuts different ways. We can't just assume that they're all going to pick this up. We have to also be prepared to support them. Our staff now, our library staff now has 15 years of experience working with the crazy ideas we have in English 105. And the next generation of faculty are often highly motivated and innovative. And they're the ones that are that second wave of early adopters that Casey was talking about, where we really want to focus our attention. And so the partnership with Adobe has been amazing. Literally, we were signing the contract in the other room when our customer success manager, Keith Spencer, turned to me and looked at me and said, what do you need to succeed? And I'm thinking, I've heard this before. Is this going to be real? Or is this just what you say until the contract's signed? And I said, I need funds for faculty development. I need funds to develop materials. I need support from Adobe Tech people because I've got to, prepare my faculty to do this. And he was shocked. He was like, he didn't expect like a real laundry list of real needs. But then he just went, okay, we'll figure it out. And he did. And so as soon as the chancellor changed my life, I went to work on a textbook called Adobe Creative Cloud Across the Curriculum, a guide for students and teachers. And so it's OER, it's for free, it's on the internet, it's available today. And it is written in a way that no other resource that I could find is written. Most of the resources out there for Adobe Creative Cloud are written for creative professionals. They're designed for professional photographers and professional filmmakers. This is written for students and teachers. It's really written for teachers because the students are even better at figuring this out than the people of my generation. And so it has all the tutorial help that's designed to be at this level so that you can pick one of these applications up in the course of 50 minutes. And it is framed entirely according to the concepts that I've been talking about today. Chapter 1 is, what do you want to create today? In the first chapter, it's not about learning an application, although if you ask our students, they are thrilled to be able to put Adobe Creative Cloud on their resumes. It may be as important as a foreign language these days. And so it begins with a focus on, what is it we're doing here? What is our mission? We're educating a new generation of citizen scholar. And the way to approach this is to begin with, what problem do I need to solve? What does my community or organization or profession need? What knowledge do I want to produce? What is it I want to learn? And then it takes the very robust suite of applications and it breaks it down according to solving those problems. And so, for example, this is the particular chapter on making print materials. It begins with, why make a print document? Why is that a good choice? Why might you want to make a film instead? Why might you want to not even make a print document? And each of these chapters ends in the same places, which is what faculty find actually most helpful, which is it has this gallery of teaching modules and student work. And so at the end of each chapter, these samples in what we call turnkey teaching modules. And so it links to something called this archive that we're building that has dozens now of these turnkey teaching modules that contain everything you need to know to get going here. And so there is a video of the instructor narrating what she did in this particular assignment. And then there's the tutorial that's appropriate for basic creators and beginners. There are lesson plans in Microsoft Word format so you can copy them and revise them easily. There's the assignment prompt and rubric right there. And then, of course, there's the student work itself. And so this particular assignment is a nice place to end because it's an English class that's teaching science. The goal of this, the learning outcome from this assignment, is to learn how science works and how scientific communication works. And the way it was enabled was, instead of creating Scientific American, a popular science journal, it was creating a Scientific Tar Heel. And if you don't know, UNC, we're the Tar Heels, whatever that means. And so students did what they've been doing in first year writing for over 20 years. They're doing literature reviews of scholarly sources in the sciences, and they're synthesizing that information. Notice what they're doing. They're finding the best information, they're locating a pattern among that information, and then they're articulating or synthesizing a perspective on that information based upon their research. And so instead of that being in a word processing document, it's going to go on a shelf that no one reads. They knew from the moment that this began that this was meant to be part of a symposium on undergraduate research. And so each student begins with an issue, a scientific question or problem or issue that they're interested in particularly, and they do the same thing they've done for years. They do scholarly research, peer-reviewed sources. We're teaching them how to integrate evidence. We're showing them the difference between different kinds of evidence, about how to evaluate credible sources. But now, because they know that it's meant to have an audience, because they know it's meant to circulate, the stakes are higher, and the quality and the engagement is much deeper. And so I like to sort of maybe close with that example, because it shows that even in an English composition class, these are sort of interdisciplinary potentials that, when used with this sort of concept in mind, have the ability to transform teaching and learning. And if we return to the opening idea, I'd like to come back to the point that in my experience, the way to enact this is to come to events like this, see things that kind of resonate with you, and this may not be the right solution for you, and then go back to your campus or in your program or with your group, make it the invitation for innovation, the reason to sit around a table locally and go, how do we want to move the needle? How can we use these moments of inspiration and conversation to move forward? And so thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this conference and to continue this conversation for myself and for each of you. Thank you. Thoughts or questions? 3:30 on Friday, no questions. Yes, Laura.
So I taught writing at UNC when you were just a kid.
That's right.
And I just want to compliment you on how far North Carolina has gone in teaching composition between the 80s when I taught there and now, which is fantastic. My question is, in terms of supplementing the writing courses at Carolina with these multimodal approaches, is the writing element contained in the sort of thing we saw with the young woman who did the magazine article? Is that where you teach the writing?
Right, and so for those who kind of can't hear the question in the back row, the question is, where is textual writing now in all of this? And I have long answers to that, but I'll try to make two quick ones. One is, because this is about, it's academic writing. It's meant for an academic audience. That means it has to be based upon evidence and credible sources. And so that means reading. It may be the reading of an interview, but most of the time it's reading and analyzing written text. And then in my class, you have to do a lot of writing before we sit down and we turn on the movie camera. You have to write a proposal in writing to work through what your plan is. You have to make a commitment to the ethical dimensions of this kind of thing. There are issues of privacy and copyright and accessibility that we use this as an opportunity to have those conversations. And so there is a lot of very conventional kinds of things that you would do, let's say, in a traditional writing class 25 years ago that all feed into this. And then the other piece I would say to this is that in my experience, for at least the students at UNC Chapel Hill, they're pretty darn good at pleasing a teacher. You know, they have figured out how to write that 5-paragraph essay in a way that has gotten them A's, but they never really knew why. They just knew that it got them an A from where they came from. So they come to school, they come to UNC, they know there's something more when it comes to writing. They don't know what that is, though. It's not just a 6th paragraph. And so what I found is that I can get students to pay a lot of attention to the craft of a transition and a title choice and the relationship between two clips and the relationship of the audio track to the visual track and the dynamic tension between the audio narrative and the visual narrative. And then they'll get so wrapped up in making all those choices. And then when it's all over, I'll say, why don't you do that with your writing? Why don't you pay that much attention to the way you craft a sentence and the way one paragraph transitions into the other? And they're like, oh my God, that never occurred to me. And so I've used it as a bait and switch to get them to pay attention to the writing in ways they never have before. So that's just some quick answers to what happened to writing in all this. Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions? I think there's going to be door prizes now. Thanks again. Oh, by the way, this is my portfolio. My portfolio no longer is in HTML. They deactivated that space. And it has links to all my presentations. It has a link to the e-textbook. And it also has a link to the textbook that I just produced a couple of months ago, which is meant to be an illustration of this idea of how these things are epistemological. And so I now think in terms of editing collages of interviews. And so I flew all around the country and interviewed over 100 different students with their experiences with college writing, and then I took their best sound bites and I wove it into a composition textbook. The idea being that it might be more powerful in some cases if students are giving advice to other students about college writing. And so I just show that as an example of how filmmaking has changed my research agenda. It's changed my research methodology. And so now I basically, for over a decade, I've been all about this sort of qualitative interview methodology in my own research. So examples of pieces that are out there and available if you want to follow up through my portfolio. So thanks again.
Thank you. Before we do the drawing, let's have a little shout out for our tech support people, including Mark over here. Mark, stand up. You're not shy. I think the rest of them are picking things up. Isn't this a little bit like the last day of Girl Scout or Boy Scout camp? We've all made friends. Now it's time to go home. We have the 3 drawings. Okay, we have the 3 drawings again. Everyone who has completed an evaluation has one. We're going to ask Mark to take the first name out. Your names are written on these cards. Mark, if you would. An honest man.
Emmy Launis.
Come on down. Happy plugs.
Thank you.
These are compliments of the NSU bookstore. Oh, certainly an honest man here. Oops, he heard about what I said about provosts in the earlier session, didn't he?
Read this now, right? It's Tamarick Rice. T-A-M-A. Tamara
Rice. Rice, Tamara Rice. Got to be here to win. Amanda Major. A passport, external hard drive, once again, courtesy of the NSU bookstore. And the last Echo Plus, and one of our esteemed keynoters, if you would, please. Hold your breath. Cross your fingers.
Joanna Fernandez.
She left. Oh, Joanna.
Robin Jackson. I'm not doing very well.
Keep drawing, yeah.
Denise Lowe. All right. Great.
How about that? Thank you all very much. Provost Rogers.
Mike beat me to it, but thank you all. Go back and spread the word. If you have filled out an evaluation form, we have plenty to fill out on the way out. It's very, very important for you to fill those out. It gives us a lot of feedback, and the Gates Foundation would like to know how this conference went.